Welcome to my mommy's podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Juve Red Light Therapy. I have been using therapeutic red light for years, and it's part of my daily routine. So if you're not familiar with it, red light therapy, also called photobiomodulation, uses very specific wavelengths of light, which are in the 660 to 850 nanometer range, for clinically studied benefits, especially skin health, thyroid health, which is the reason I started using it, reducing pain and inflammation, and so much more. It also has studies that show it can help hair regenerate and grow thicker and stronger, which is another wonderful benefit that I've noticed, and I noticed a ton of skin benefits as well. It's definitely become part of my life and my routine. Juve especially, they're third-party tested, they're validated by external studies, and they're FDA approved. They also have several different sizes of these red lights in combination that can fit in any size home or apartment. And they have a new modular design, which allows you to build a full body system all at once or over time. You can check all of that out on their website. Go to joovv.com/wellnessmama. That's JOOVV.com/wellnessmama to learn more. And you can also grab a special gift with any order. So check it out, joov.com/wellnessmama. This podcast is brought to you by KidsLoveToSwim.com. I recently found this and absolutely adore this course, and I had to share it with you. We all know how important water safety is and how kids can drown in just minutes or seconds in a small amount of water, and especially if they don't know how to swim. In fact, the inability to swim is one of the biggest factors linked to drowning. This is such an important issue. It's a bigger risk for kids to drown in water than playing alone outside or walking to school by themselves. In fact, 2 children die every single day from accidental drowning. It's a horrible and big important issue. And for this reason, swimming is so much more than just a sport. It's a vital life skill that all of us need, but I get it, it can be super intimidating and scary for kids. You already teach your kids their ABCs and how to ride a bike and what foods help their body grow. And now, you can teach them to swim safely at home with this online course. You get the skills of a certified water safety instructor and lifeguard and parent, and he teaches you in just 5 simple steps and in only 14 days how to take your kids to swimming proficiency in a fun, engaging way that will increase their water ability drastically and also their bond with you. Go to KidsLoveToSwim.com to find out how. That's KidsLoveToSwim.com. Hello and welcome to the Healthy Moms Podcast. I'm Katie from wellnessmama.com, and this interview is going to be so important, especially if you are a parent, because we are talking all about EMFs, how they affect our body, and especially how they're affecting our children. And I am here with Dr. Amy, who is a physician with over 30 years of practice. She has seen firsthand very concerning changes in the health of the general population in the span of her career. And we're going to talk about a lot of the problems that didn't used to exist that are now problems in children, and why she doesn't accept that the common explanations of just diet and diagnostic criteria are what's making the difference. And over the past decade, she's done extensive research on EMFs and is increasingly convinced that EMFs are playing a very significant contributory effect in the diseases of civilization, as they call them. So Dr. Amy, welcome and thanks for being here.
It's so nice to be here with you, Katie. I'm excited to talk.
Me too. I know this is a topic that we're both very passionate about, and I know that it's also a topic that can be very controversial and one that tends to get dismissed quite a bit even in the health world. So I can't wait to go deep on this. To start off, I want to make sure we clearly define our terms so that everybody listening knows what we're talking about when we say things like EMFs. So can you kind of just walk us through the basics of what EMF actually is and what the different sources are?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. There is a lot of confusion. And part of the confusion is that there are multiple terms that basically apply to the same thing. But I'm just going to call it EMF, which means electromagnetic fields. Some people say forces. And basically what EMFs are, with the exception of sunlight, which is visible, it is all of the invisible forces that we are exposed to in this world. They can be magnetic forces, as in the North Pole, or magnetic forces that come from appliances and items, electrical fields. They can be wireless forces that come from cell phone antennas or cell phone towers. So that's basically it. It's electromagnetic fields.
And so, like you said, these can come from the sun, which are natural sources, and but also from man-made technology, which would be everything, like you said, from cell phones to Wi-Fi to all the different spectrums that we're exposed to these days. Is there a difference in how those different ones affect the body?
That's a really good question. All of the science is pointing to non-ionizing radiation, which is these lower level forms that come from wired and wireless technologies. This doesn't include cosmic radiation or nuclear radiation. Those are called ionizing. We've known for many, many years that those are damaging, and they're damaging quickly and immediately. But the non-ionizing radiation, and that's what's really up for debate here, it's the wired and wireless sources. All of the science is pretty much indicating that they all affect us in the same physiologic manner, and they all probably cause about the same degree of damage and damage our cells in pretty much the same way. So it doesn't really matter if it's a magnetic field or an electric field or a wireless field, which are sometimes called radio frequency fields. They all can impact our physiology.
That makes sense. And so that could be, I would guess, like in a good way, for instance, from the sun, that has all the different spectrums of light and infrared and things that our body actually needs. Where compared to like man-made forms, which can be much more harmful because they're not the natural spectrums that our body is used to. Am I understanding correctly?
That's absolutely right. So when you look at the spectrum of what's called the electromagnetic spectrum, down on the very low frequency end, you would have the Schumann resonance of the Earth. And then about midway up, you would have sunlight. And then up in the high frequency spectrum, you would have cosmic radiation. And up until about 130 years ago, that's all there was. And that's, from time immemorial, that's what mankind was exposed to. But over the past 130 years, with the advent of electricity, and over the past 30 years with the incredible growth in wireless technologies, we have a large part of the spectrum that we historically were not exposed to. And that is, it's not ionizing radiation. It's not immediately dangerous like I was referring to before, but the science is strongly indicating that it is damaging our cells over time and that it's all additive.
So let's go deeper on that, because that is the biggest, when I've written about EMFs in any general way in the past, I know it's a controversial topic, like I said, but that is the most common pushback that I get from both the medical community and the scientific community, is that it's quote unquote non-ionizing radiation. Therefore, it's completely safe. It's not X-ray or gamma or any of the ones we know to be dangerous. And so they say it's completely safe and there's no evidence of harm. And my gut, I don't have the medical background that you have, but my gut is our bodies are electric organisms in and of themselves. Our cells are individually electric organisms. Our heart is an electric organism. It doesn't make sense to me that it would have no impact. So I'm curious, from your medical background, what you see as like the mechanism of what's happening over the long term. Because like you said, we're pretty new in this field. We don't have a long amount of data to really study this. We've only, the last few decades, it's really taken off. And so I'm really curious in your clinical experience and your medical background, what you're seeing.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense that something has to burn you to hurt you, does it? I mean, that's basically what ionizing radiation does. It causes thermal injury, and then it breaks molecular bonds, breaks DNA, causes mutation. It does it quickly. What we're saying the non-ionizing do is it does those same things, but over a very long period of time. In 2013, Martin Pall, he's a researcher at Washington State University, really probably discovered the primary mechanism of injury. And what he found is that EMF disrupts the amount of calcium that's inside of our cells. Every single cell in your body has what are called voltage-gated calcium channels. These are these really exquisitely sensitive little channels that control how much calcium is allowed to enter a cell. And when he exposed cells to EMF, these were, test tube sort of studies, those little gates were perturbed and they abnormally opened, and there was an abnormal influx of calcium into the cell. And calcium has to be very precisely controlled in a cell. And when there is an abnormal amount inside versus outside, it has a lot of effects. A couple of the big effects were increasing reactive oxygen species. I think most of your listeners would have heard about that and about oxidation being a negative thing. There are analogous compounds called reactive nitrogen species, and they pretty much do the same thing in terms of damaging a cell. So that has kind of been, and that work has been replicated as well, and it's held up to scrutiny. And that is considered to be probably the primary mechanism as we understand it now. And then you have some secondary and tertiary things that happen. We're not totally sure of the linkage, but downstream we have breaks in DNA. And DNA is our genetic blueprint. It needs to be exact. We can't have breaks. We can't have the code getting disrupted. For meaningful function of a cell, that DNA needs to be exact, or you start to have cancer risk or just metabolic disturbances over time. And this is probably an area where children are more susceptible because they're growing. Their DNA is always being replicated and what's called transcripted, or it's being used as a blueprint for cellular function. Children are also probably more acceptable here to this DNA damage because they're going to live longer. They're going to, that DNA is going to have to work longer and longer, and it's going to accrue more and more injury over time. So that was one of the downstream effects. Several of the other downstream effects from the calcium-gated channels are cellular cultures are known to produce what are, in response to EMF exposure, are known to produce what's called heat shock proteins, which are now basically just called stress proteins. So that shows you that those cells are under duress. And another thing that happens downstream is disruption of what's called the blood-brain barrier. For a brain to be to have proper function, the brain maintains its own very isolated environment. It doesn't like things getting in or out very easily, and it's been shown with rat studies, basically, that EMF causes some disruption of this barrier. So those are some of sort of the basic changes that we've seen, and those changes, we don't really know how they all translate into organ problems, but a lot of the studies indicate problems in organs really across the board, from neurodegenerative problems like Alzheimer's and ALS to autism, and ADHD and learning problems, from cardiac arrhythmia, glucose control and diabetes. I think it's not surprising from a physiologic standpoint that multiple systems are affected when you consider that the primary known mechanism for EMF injury is the voltage-gated calcium channel, which exists in every cell in your body. And like you said, Katie, we are electric, and some organs are more electric than others, and brain and heart would be at the top of that list. And if you noticed on my list of organ systems that can be affected, a lot of those were neurologic, and there was also, the cardiac arrhythmia noted there. So this is kind of an overview of the impact of EMFs. One area that I didn't bring up was melatonin suppression, and I think this is really, really key. Melatonin, of course, is a hormone secreted by your brain, which is secreted at nighttime and helps you get into that deep, really, really restful sleep. I would say that there are many good studies on melatonin suppression. By the year 2000, I read recently that there were 15 great studies. That's what Martin Pall in his excellent book states. And I think that if you don't want to accept that EMF may be causing injury in these vast areas, cancer and Alzheimer's and infertility, etc., if you just believe nothing else but that it may disrupt sleep, then I think that's incredibly compelling. Because we all know that once sleep is compromised, that eventually you're just not well. So that's kind of a really big overview of primary and secondary mechanisms and organ systems that can become affected. In my career as a pediatrician, I have seen changes, especially I would say in the last 5 years, that really our conventional thought has no explanation for. One of the big ones is the emergence of insulin resistance